Hello, everyone, and welcome. The video today has been produced as part of the Healthy Minds section of the Pregnancy and Family Pop-Up Village. We hope that you've attended or will attend in the future. The subject that we're dealing with today is a difficult one. It's the subject of the grief that follows perinatal loss or pregnancy loss or infant loss. Perhaps you're listening because this has been your experience, or you know someone who's been through this experience. Perhaps you're listening because you simply know that these kinds of losses are real in your community and you want to learn more. So you're welcome. Before we go too far, I need to go through just a few definitions so that we all know what we're talking about here today. Early pregnancy loss is a term that refers to a loss during the first trimester of pregnancy. Miscarriage overlaps that period of time and is the loss of a pregnancy or a baby within the first 19 weeks and 6 days of pregnancy. And then stillbirth is the term that we use when a baby dies inside before birth and is born between 20 weeks and full term. All of these are hard, difficult, and complex in and of themselves. And then neonatal death or infant death. Neonatal death means in the first 30 days. Now that could mean in the first few minutes of life and then the baby passes away, or up to that 30-day mark. And infant death means anytime a baby dies after birth but before the first birthday. So those are some of the parameters that people use. But I have to tell you, it's really hard to talk about such deeply personal and difficult experiences in all of these clinical terms and categories. I just felt like we needed to name the categories so you know what we're speaking of as we talk about the grief related to them. I also need to mention that there are other categories that fall outside of perinatal loss, but may cause grief that's similar. Anytime that parenting is interrupted or not the way that we would hope for, it can cause similar grief. So this would be things like adoption. No matter how you feel about the decision to adopt out, it may cause grief, will cause grief to adjust to, and it can be long lasting. And same is true of anytime there's a termination or an abortion. Again, whether you feel good about your decision or not, that decision and that change in your life can produce grief. Infertility is another example where a couple longs to have a baby and is unable to. So that can be a complicated grief for them. And another sort of more general example is that sometimes when you have a baby, it ends up that someone else is doing the parenting. So it may be that it wasn't a good time for you to be able to do that. And so grandma's caring for the baby, or a relative took the baby, and you may have a relationship with that child now or may not. But if it's not what you might have hoped for and not what you might wish for now, it can produce some of these same grief symptoms that we'll be talking about. And so I just want to say to you, you're welcome, and listen for what makes sense to you. So I'm going to share my screen with you because I want to show you an image and then a couple of other things. Thanks for waiting for me. So let's talk about grief itself. What is grief? It's said that grief is an adaptive response when there's the loss of someone or something that's precious to you. Well, certainly that applies to you if you've lost a baby. But it's very clear that it's necessary to adapt because your life is changed. It may be in invisible ways, but things have been altered. And so it requires what we might describe as a season of sorting, sorting out the life that you hoped for, the disappointment, the hurt, sorting out the meaning and significance of the loss of relationships now and of who you are now and where you're going now. So that is why grief is is necessary when there's a loss. It's not just the absence of that baby, it's the effects on your internal life and experienced life. So this is a list that researchers and scientists and psychologists have. This is a collection of lists of what they describe as large aspects of grief, what we experience, what all human beings in grief experience. And I'm showing it to you now just to point out that how diverse and complex it can be. So feeling shocked at the loss, that is a natural response. Feeling angry, if you're not a person who's angry easily, having that experience in grief might be uncomfortable. But of course, it's something that you didn't want to happen. So you might have to go through a season of blaming or feeling that things have been unfair to you and that sort of thing. This one, searching and yearning, is what most people think of when they think of grief. So that's what most people think of. Look how long that list is other than that. But it means just longing to be with the baby in the way that you hoped for, wishing that there were a way to stay connected or to see the baby again, hold the baby again, that sort of thing. That is what is almost a universal experience of people in grief. And I won't go through and describe all of these. Feeling disoriented, like nothing in your life fits and things don't work. Eventually there's some level of acceptance, although we know that we're never really the same. We never stop thinking about that baby and wondering about it. But we do, if you look at the last one, we do need to work to find an enduring connection with the baby, a way to carry the baby forward. How will we remember? How will we talk about? And what does that mean in our life going forward? So that's an overview of some of those big categories. But let's talk about what those big categories might feel like for you. We could call these pages symptoms, meaning your experiences. And there we go. So let's look at this page. Super crowded page, lots on this page. And if you just pick out a couple of these and look at them, you'll realize that these are intense. In other words, if you feel agitated, that's exhausting. And that's just one part of grief. If you feel emptiness without baby, that can be incredibly draining for anyone and something to overcome and to try to solve. I will point out with this big list of difficult symptoms that we also have here the symptom of strength. Some people, after coming through something difficult, find that they have a sense of strength for having gotten through. Same thing with thankfulness. Not thankful for the loss, of course, but thankful for the things they do have, or thankful for support that they've received. So very complex. Nobody feels all of these, but most people feel many of these throughout the time of grief, which can run from many months to 2 or 3 years, depending on your personality and your circumstances and that sort of thing. Now that I've shown you this complex page, I have to confess to you that this is just one page out of 5. What we just looked at were the emotional or feeling side of symptoms, but there are also the thinking side and processing side of symptoms. So our thoughts might be consumed with looking for answers. But at the same time that we're looking for answers, we're having trouble concentrating and having trouble making decisions. So grief can be sort of handicapping just in how taxing it is for us. And we have these experiences not because we're going through grief wrong or because we're broken. We're going through these experiences because we're in grief. So thinking that you're different than others, wondering about what might have been is one of those symptoms that persists sometimes for many, many years, that wondering. But it may be also gripping for you in these earlier seasons. And then it's something to work to get into balance. Again, we use the word sorting, so sorting those things out. Did you know that grief has physical symptoms? Yes, so you might guess that tiredness, or feeling weak or not having energy would come with grief because of the emotional taxing. But you also have physical symptoms like changes in your sleep, like arms that actually have physical pain because they are longing to hold the baby that's no longer there. Heart palpitations, chest pain. So those are physical and they're real, but they can all be a part of grief. And of course, there are those social things, the things that have to do with interacting with others and how we choose to behave. Some people are overachieving, meaning they're working hard to do well to help them overcome grief or make up for lost time. Maybe underachieving because you're exhausted and because it's really hard to care when what's most on your mind is the baby who's not there. So again, look how long this list is. And these are just a few of the symptoms that experts would list as part of grief. So I point all that out to you to point out how deep and complex it is. And speaking of depth, there are spiritual symptoms in grief. Spirituality can be things that have to do with meaning, your view of the world, your philosophy of life, and those things are closely connected to religious belief, faith beliefs, faith communities. And after a loss, many people are questioning many aspects of it, partly because it may not work as well for them, but also because it's you feel different on the inside. So relating to your previous practices or beliefs just feel differently. So then you question, is this what I still believe or what I still want? So just really a weighty list for all of us to consider as a part of grief. Now, I said that grief is a normal adaptive response, meaning that it helps us process or adjust to the change in our lives. And you might say, after looking at those long, burdensome lists, you might say, wait, hold on. How is that adaptive? How is that helping me? How is this talk helping me? Let me try to show you what this information might do to help you with the grief and the grief symptoms that you're having. We know that inner sorting and the sorting of your everyday life is necessary. Why is it necessary? Simply because nothing is the same. You are not the same, and the life ahead of you is not the same as what you had imagined or hoped for. So it's necessary to take a new look at things and find a new way to step forward, a new way to make choices based on what's important to you and how you identify. So the sorting is necessary. Here's what might help you. It might help you to recognize that your own mind is working to heal you. The symptoms might sound and might be burdensome, complicated, but all of these phases and symptoms are actually your mind working to evaluate what you've been through and who you are and put together a new life and a life where you are actually coming to a better state. And by a better state, what I mean is a state where, one, you are able to hold the baby and carry the baby forward in some way that's meaningful to you. And at the same time, you're also able to feel more normal and be empowered in your daily life again. So bringing all that together is what that sorting and those symptoms and those phases are all about. So this doesn't make it easy, I know that, but hopefully looking at it in this way, you can recognize that you're not broken, you're not doing it wrong, and you're doing very, very important work. The work you're doing internally, those internal experiences, are bringing you to a more healed state. So how do you get through that? Well, part of it is what I just said, that you're doing the work internally, but the other big part is support. What do we mean by support? Support can come from all different categories, and we're going to go through 3 categories. But first, let me just point out that anyone who's going through something difficult benefits from being supported. They come through that difficult time better and more whole, and often more confident and more healthy. So during grief, which we agreed was very deep and very complex and always painful, we need more support. We need extra support. So where will that come from? 3 categories: family and friends. I hope that you all have family and friends who are supportive to you. That's awesome. But if they're supportive in the usual way, that might not be enough. We said that in grief, we all need a little extra support. So this is a time when you look at family and friends to think about the broader circle of your family or the broader circle of your friends, and consider who in those broader circles has the right wisdom for you now. So that cousin who maybe you don't talk to that often, but she's had a loss, and you can call her up and say, hey, I need to talk. And for dads, that brother-in-law who you usually just hang out with and play basketball or whatever you do. Maybe this time you can play basketball and sit together for a while and maybe talk, or maybe just be together in a way that helps you because you trust this particular member of the family to be supportive and to listen, and to respect where you are at personally. So family and friends, yes, but a wider circle and choosing that one who has the right wisdom for now. That's where the support needs to come from for this. Second category, looking at support groups. There are all different kinds of support groups: virtual support groups, in-person support groups. Some are very casual, some are more structured, whatever. They're out there, and you'll have a link with this video to look at a list of a few local ones. There are lots more out there, but there's be a few to start with. So why support groups? A lot of people hear that and think, not my cup of tea. They feel vulnerable. They really don't want to be in that setting. But think about the benefits of a support group. The first benefit is it's a safe place for people in grief. If you're grieving and you're in a grief support group, you don't have to weigh or sort how you feel or what you might say. Everybody there's in a similar boat, especially if you can find someone, a support group that is a perinatal support group specifically. And so it allows you to be sort of at ease in a safe place, in a safe world almost, for a minute. The second benefit of the support group is hearing other people's stories. And again, you may think, I don't want to hear more sadness. But in reality, what usually happens in a support group is that when you hear other people's stories, you're able to recognize things that are the same as what you've experienced, or at least similar, and you feel less alone and more sane, and very often more supported. And so that's the second benefit of a support group. And the third benefit of a support group is the opportunity to tell your story. Maybe your family's heard your story and they're grieving too, and they don't really want to rehash it. Well, here's a safe place for you to do so. And maybe you think about it differently now than you did 3 months ago, and you don't really have an easy outlet to speak. Well, a support group can provide that for you. So think about it and check out the list if you want to. The third category is another one that is very, very important, and that's the possibility of using a counselor or a therapist of some kind. And for you, I will recommend specifically seeing a grief counselor or some counselor or therapist who has experience with supporting people in grief. And again, many people hesitate, but I want to remind you that this is not seeing a counselor because you're mentally ill. This is seeking a little extra help, just a little extra help for a period of time when you need the extra help. Therapists and counselors are good for a long list of things. They can see couples or individuals, but I will just share that seeing a counselor very often can lighten the burden of and the weight of grief itself, because you're sharing on a one-to-one basis about your very personal experience. understanding what's normal, and getting ideas for ways to cope or for help. So it lightens the weight of the emotions involved often. Yeah, that's it. So we talked about grief, and we talked about the idea of sorting and the necessary sorting, and we talked about 3 ways to find the extra support that everyone in grief needs. My hope for you is that you are able and willing to consider taking one step to find a little extra support. Whether it's family and friends, whether it's checking our list for a support group to try, or choosing a counselor to see for a period of time. Everybody needs a little help. I hope this week you can take a step. Thanks for listening.